last few weeks for Bitcoin has been absolutely brutal. Just in the past week alone, we lost a key support level and sold off aggressively. And when you zoom out, the move becomes even more extreme. Since Bitcoin topped in October, price is roughly down around 50% from the peak. That's a massive drawdown, especially considering how fast it happened. Now, for anyone who's been watching the channel, this shouldn't come as a huge surprise. We have talked about for a while how Bitcoin is in a bear market right now, not just a correction, but even with that expectation, I don't think people anticipated how fast we will come to these levels. The selling pressure hasn't been gradual, it's been sharp, emotional and aggressive. Again, the past few weeks for Bitcoin has been rough. Sentiment has flipped extremely fast. We went from being in fear to now in extreme fear in a very short time period. What makes this cycle stand out isn't just the downside, it's the speed which Bitcoin has been moving down to levels that took way longer in previous cycles. One of the most important levels a lot of people are watching right now is the 200-week moving average. Historically, this level has acted as key support in previous bear markets. In every previous cycle, Bitcoin either bounced off this level or went below it for some time before eventually coming back up. In the most recent bear market, Bitcoin did spend some time below the 200-week moving average, so it's not unrealistic to expect something similar to happen again. But what has been surprising is how fast we have approached this level. Just last week, Bitcoin was only 3% away from touching this 200-week moving average, before finding temporary support around the previous cycle highs. That level helps slow the price down, but the larger trend remains intact. This becomes even clearer if we look at previous bear market on the weekly time frame. Historically, once Bitcoin breaks below the 50-week moving average, it has taken somewhere between 22 and 29 weeks to reach the 200-week moving average. But this time, it's been roughly 12 weeks since we broke below the 50-week moving average, and we already went down within 3% of the 200-week moving average. That's not a small difference, it's almost twice as fast compared to previous cycles. And the same pattern shows up if we look at the 100-week moving average on the weekly time frame. In previous cycles, the move from the 100-week moving average down to the 200-week moving average typically took between 4 and 15 weeks. This time we nearly completed that move in just 2 weekly candles. We haven't technically hit the level, but the point here isn't precision. The point here is the momentum and how fast we have moved there. To put this into perspective, a typical bear market lasts around 1 year from the cycle top to the bottom. This time the top occurred in October and we are only about 4 months in. Yet price is already trading at levels historically where Bitcoin didn't reach until later in the bear market. So while price might feel cheap, the bear market is still relatively young. That disconnect between price damage and time passed isn't very important to understand. But then again, is it really the same this time around? Now Bitcoin has roughly dropped about 50%, and if we compare that to previous bear markets when they dropped 50%, the timeline actually lines up pretty well. From the top, it took about 17 weeks for Bitcoin to drop more than 50%. In previous cycles, that same 50% drawdown happened much faster. Now, the reason we're so much closer to the 200-week moving average this time is likely because the rally beforehand wasn't as aggressive as in the past cycles. Price simply didn't get as extended above the 200-week moving average as it did in previous cycles, and that's why we reached it faster this time around, I think. Now, let's try and look at some indicators that are also flashing right now. On the weekly RSI, Bitcoin has now entered the oversold zone. This is extremely rare on the weekly time frame and has historically only happened near major market lows. In previous cycles, when the weekly RSI reached these levels, Bitcoin was either already at the bottom or very close to forming one. Now, some people will argue that the weekly RSI isn't as meaningful and that the monthly RSI is more important to look at. And I get that, because when you look at the monthly time frame, we have a long-term RSI trend line that has historically aligned very close with bear market bottoms. That's something I've personally started to pay some attention to. That said, seeing the weekly RSI this oversold is still significant. It doesn't happen often, and historically when the RSI goes to these levels, it has been a good accumulation zone, even if the price still continues to go lower. We also recently saw the lowest daily RSI reading since 2020. I don't put too much weight on the daily RSI alone, but it does highlight how stretched this move has really been. Now, does that mean that the bottom is in? And that is a very important question. Now, despite all these signals lining up, I don't think we are near a bottom right now. Not because it can't be, but historically these bottoms takes longer to form. Calling an exact bottom is almost impossible, and trying to do so can often lead to poor decisions. What matters more is understanding possibilities and scenarios and not an exact price. Based on historical levels, a low sometime in June to October still makes the most sense to me. With that in mind, I want to walk you through two scenarios I think could play out going forward. These are not predictions, they are a framework. The first scenario is simple and probably the most likely one. In this case, Bitcoin goes lower and follows a similar path like 2022. If we overlay previous bear market price action, we can see similarities in how price finds temporary support, breaks down again, and eventually trades below the 200-week moving average. In this scenario, Bitcoin breaks below the 200-week moving average after a little bit of consolidation, spends some time below it, and forms a bottom sometime around October. This would be a very traditional bear market outcome like the other cycles. Slow, painful, and emotionally exhausting. Nothing dramatic, just a process. Historically speaking, this scenario has the highest probability. Now, let's talk about this second scenario. The second scenario is less obvious, but still makes sense. In this case, Bitcoin finds a low sometime in June and follows a similar structure like 2019. Here's why that comparison matters. In 2013, 2017, and 2021, Bitcoin topped during euphoria phases, but 2025 didn't get that full-blown euphoria phase like we saw those times. The top felt closer to apathy than mania. That makes 2019 a more relevant comparison since we also topped in apathy that time. In this scenario, Bitcoin finds support near current levels or slightly lower, potentially takes the 200-week moving average, then rallies upwards to retest the 200-week moving average. After that, price could still reject and briefly trade below the 200-week moving average, but only for a short period before transitioning back into a bullish structure. This would align with a bottom forming around June instead of October. Of course, it's not gonna play out perfectly when you overlay it, but it gives a roadmap of how price could be moving going forward in 2026. To be clear, nobody knows what's gonna happen. There is always a chance that the market does something unexpected. For all we know, next week the bull market could be back on again. That's why flexibility matters more than conviction. So the best thing we can do is prepare for multiple outcomes. Personally, I'm just staying calm right now and accumulating. I am DCAing slowly and sticking to my plan so I don't make any emotional decisions. Lower prices simply allows me to accumulate more over time without needing to guess the exact bottom. Last week was rough, that's just the reality, but this is also how bear market feels. Uncomfortable, uncertain, and exhausting. I'm focused on discipline, patience, and the long-term plan. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. Comment down below what I can do better. I'd love to hear from you guys. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.